Now, as the name of the video implies, this is part 10 of a story, so unless you want to be very lost and confused, I'd recommend starting at part 1, and if you like it, working your way back here eventually. I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below, and without further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves on Jakku, looking out at a vast nothingness of desert, when we suddenly hear the sounds of combat, and we turn and see a humanoid figure, wrapped from head to toe in tan desert garb, wielding a staff and fighting off no less than 6 droid attackers. And vigilantly watching over the fight, which actually looks like little more than training, are 2 Imperial Royal Guards. Off not far in the distance, we can see a large Imperial compound of some type. And as we watch this humanoid figure fight, we see that their attacks and movements are fast and smooth, almost serpent-like, and the figure makes quick work of the droid attackers, taking out one after another with perfect strikes from their staff, until only 3 remain, which the figure finishes off with one powerful force push that tears the droids apart and sends their pieces flying off into the desert. The figure then drives the end of their staff into the sand, breathing heavily as they pull a small flashing communicator free from a pocket. Over the comm, we then hear the voice of Mara Jade say to the figure, "There's been an incident." We then switch scenes, and we find ourselves on Yavin and in the hangar of the Rebel base, where Kanan and Anakin have just landed their ships and popped the hatches. Both then look across the way at each other, and Anakin gives Kanan one appreciative nod, which Kanan returns with a grin upon his face before hopping out of the cockpit as a swarm of cheering rebels reaches his ship and engulfs him. But none approach Anakin's X-Wing, and he sits in it for a long while and watches the celebration, a small smile on his face and a look of understanding in his eyes. Finally, he slides out of his X-Wing and starts to walk the other way, away from the festivities, when we hear someone clear their throat behind him, and Anakin turns around and sees Captain Rex standing there, who immediately comes to attention and gives a crisp salute and says, "General Skywalker, CT-7567, reporting for duty, sir." Anakin holds back a smile and returns the salute and says, "At ease, Captain, and my last order for you is to never again call me General, but rather Anakin, and hopefully, friend." The 2 clasp hands, and Rex says, "It's good to have you back, Anakin." Anakin replies, "It's good to be back, my old friend." And that is when more of the rebels start to come over, and they all start to pat Anakin on the back and tell him how amazing his flying was, and how incredible that shot was, and he only humbly replies that it was only thanks to Kanan and the other pilots that he was able to succeed this day. But we now switch to a different part of the crowd, to where Kanan is, and we watch as an anxious Leia pushes her way through and finally reaches him, and as soon as she does, she looks into Kanan's eyes, and her hand goes to his face as she says, "You can see again." Kanan replies, "It's odd, but I think I had to lose my sight to learn how to really see, and I understand so much better now, and I see what truly matters to me." To that, Leia just flings her arms around him and says, "I thought you'd left me." Kanan returns the embrace. I told Han to tell you I'd be coming back." We hear Leia mutter a curse before saying, "He forgot to mention that part," and then she pulls back a bit and asks, "Where exactly did you go?" Kanan doesn't answer, and instead leans in and gives her a long kiss, causing the crowd around him to cheer, and when it's over, he sees that Leia is just staring at him. Kanan then immediately shakes his head. I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry, Princess. I mean, Leia, or maybe I should just call you Princess. And I know we're Jedi. We're not supposed to give in to these types of feelings," and Kanan stops and finally notices that Leia is actually looking over his shoulder and beyond him. That's when Kanan says, "Your father's standing right behind me, isn't he?" Leia gives him a sheepish little grin and nods. Kanan turns and sees Anakin standing there, arms folded, but with an expression that is more amused than anything else. Kanan is about to explain, but Anakin holds up a hand to silence him. "This is a discussion for another time and place," is all Anakin says. Kanan replies, "But the Jedi Code," and Anakin again raises his hand and cuts him off. "How well do you think I follow that code, considering I have a daughter?" Kanan thinks for a moment and grins, but quickly wipes it off his face and says, "But still..." Anakin quickly raises a hand and says, "Right now, my only concern is getting to Jakku to save my Padawan." Kanan's face wrinkles in confusion, and then he says, his expression darkening, "Ahsoka. She was the one responsible for Ezra, my Padawan's death. He said as much with his dying breath." "That's impossible," Anakin says back, firmly shaking his head. "She came to me in a vision, said she was being possessed by some ancient Sith, and now she's on Jakku. I can feel it. Kanan lowers his head, looking ashamed. Of course Ahsoka would have nothing to do with it. That'd be the voice Ezra encountered in that Sith temple on Malachor, the same one that spoke through him, no doubt. How could I be so foolish to think anything else? Anakin lays a hand on Kanan's shoulder and says, anger can easily cloud our perception and judgment. Kanan nods to that as the crowd that's still around them starts to part, and we see Bail Organa approach, his eyes locked on Anakin, who immediately gives a slight bow and says, Senator Organa. Bail says nothing for a long moment before giving a slight nod and saying, Master Skywalker, we are indebted to you this day, and though I do not know how much or little authority I will have in the aftermath of today's events, I will do all I can to make sure you remain a free man. Bail then leans in really close, his face intense as he says just above a whisper, but make no mistake, there is a part of me, a big part of me, that thinks you should pay very dearly for all the atrocities committed by Darth Vader. Anakin shuts his eyes and nods. I feel exactly as you do, Senator. Bail gives him a curious look, but they are then interrupted by Leia, who asks, what do you mean about the aftermath of today's events? Bail gives one last long look at Anakin, almost like a warning, and then says to Leia, word is already spreading about the Emperor's death, and there is chaos on Coruscant and a power struggle. Apparently there's also a rumor that the Emperor was going to permanently disband the Imperial Senate and give power over to the regional governors, but he held off on that announcement in favor of going to the Death Star to personally oversee the end of the rebellion. Bail lets out a heavy sigh. I'm not sure if we've just saved the galaxy or made things far worse than they already were. We then find ourselves back on Jakku and see Maul's old Mandalorian ship has landed not far from a small settlement, and then we're inside the ship, in the cockpit, and see Luke standing over Ahsoka as she comes to. Luke grins down at her. Getting rid of the last remnants of her, huh? Ahsoka flashes him a dark look. I didn't realize the light side would be so strong here. There must be a spark at the core of this planet. She somehow used that to her advantage, but it won't happen again. Luke shrugs to that and says, something happened while you were unconscious. I felt a great disturbance in the Force. Ahsoka shuts her eyes and concentrates for a moment. Sidious has been destroyed, and Darth Vader is no more. The new Sith and their rule of two are over. Luke looks surprised and responds, my father's dead? Ahsoka shakes her head. No, I sense that only Vader is no more, but Anakin yet lives, which means the false chosen one will still need to be dealt with. Luke gives her a look. How does that make any sense? Aren't Vader and my father one and the same? Ahsoka sighs and rolls her eyes and mutters, so much to learn. Luke snaps back. Well, maybe if you spent more time teaching me and less time dragging us to these useless planets. You did say I was ready to be trained after all. I did, Ahsoka replies, but right now you're making me question my own judgment. Besides, it will be my master who trains you, not me. Luke gives a slight, almost unsure frown to all that as he looks out upon the small settlement they've landed near and sees two stormtroopers approaching. And what exactly are we doing on this planet of all places? Seems like there's a pretty good Imperial presence here. Ahsoka replies as she eyes the approaching stormtroopers. The map to my master is here on Jakku, in an Imperial compound not far from here. It is a map many Sith over the ages have worked upon, but that Sidious has finally completed. Luke looks skeptical. How do you know it's here? Ahsoka replies, I hear the words of my master when I meditate, and he knows all. He has been watching the Sith over the ages. He is a part of them, whether they realize it or not, and he's been calling out to only the most powerful and worthy, guiding them to him. Sidious, of course, heard the call, but didn't know what it was. He thought it was the source of the dark side power in the galaxy, and that if he reached it, it would make him even stronger. Luke thinks for a moment and then says, well, if he thought that, and the map was finished, why hadn't he gone out there already? What was he waiting for? Ahsoka looks stumped. I am unsure, but there must be a reason why he delayed. We then hear some banging on the ship, and the two stormtroopers who'd been approaching are saying, open up in there. That's when Ahsoka grins. Either way, we must get into that compound, and I believe I have an idea as to how. We're then back at the Rebel base on Yavin and see Anakin, Leia, Kanan, and Rex all talking to Han, who stands in front of the Millennium Falcon, arms folded as he says, I want you to know the only reason I'm doing this is because Chewie insists. Says he used to know this Master Yoda he heard you all mention. Leia groans and says, you mean Master Yoda, and we know the only reason you're willing to take us to Jakku is all the credits you've been promised. Han looks like he's about to protest, but then just shrugs as if to say, you got me there. Leia then groans. At least your Wookiee friend has honor. Is there anything besides money you care about? Again, Han just gives a shrug. Leia looks like she's about to say more when Anakin puts a hand on her shoulder. Relax, Leia. All he has to do is get us to Jakku. What could go wrong? Leia gives a small smile and nods. Good point. I just wish we didn't have to rely on him to get us there, that's all. Han gives a look to say, hey, I'm standing right here, but says nothing. Anakin then reminds Leia that all the Imperial forces have been ordered by the Senate, which has taken hesitant control, to stand down. And since there is a rumored base on Jakku, the last thing that's needed now is for any ship at all associated with the rebellion to show up and destroy that ever so fragile piece. So their best option is to take the old piece of junk Corellian freighter. We then jump scenes, and we get a shot of the Imperial base on Jakku before we're inside and following a stormtrooper walking through the corridors, his head going from side to side, looking at and taking everything in. He passes several other troopers and officers, but none of them pay him any attention at all, and all seem to be very distracted, and we hear a few talking about who will take the Emperor's place, while others say this is probably all some kind of trick of the rebellion, and that the Emperor really is still alive. Finally, though, the stormtrooper we've been following comes to a control panel and starts to work at it when we hear him say to himself, I can't see a thing in this helmet. And it is, of course, the voice of Luke. And that's when we hear another voice come from behind him say, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Luke whirls around and standing behind him is Mara Jade, with her hands on her hips. Luke cocks his helmeted head to the side and stares for a long moment before he finally raises a hand, slowly waves it at her and says, I'm authorized to use this control panel. Mara Jade almost laughs, but instead says, you have got to be kidding me. Do I look weak-minded to you? Luke shakes his head and Mara continues, then why did you think that would work on me? Luke gives an exaggerated shrug to that, and Mara Jade then asks him, I feel the Force is strong with you, but who are you? Luke removes the helmet and says with almost a smile on his face, I'm Luke Skywalker. Mara looks caught off guard and mutters how she didn't expect him to actually answer, but then realizes what he said. Skywalker? The child of Anakin Skywalker? But that can't be. You're supposed to be a she and we've met before. Luke frowns. You're just thinking of my twin sister Leia. Mara again seems caught off guard that he's so liberal with the information and says, you're either extremely confident or extremely foolish. Maybe both, Luke offers before grimacing, realizing how stupid that sounds. Mara then ignites a red lightsaber and says, if you truly are the son of Anakin Skywalker, know before I kill you that I will also kill him for betraying my master. Luke holds up his hands defensively. Wait, he cries out, you also want my father dead? Once again, Mara seems caught off guard by Luke's words. You seek to destroy your father? Luke nods almost enthusiastically. I do, so there's no need for us to fight. We're basically allies. Mara then moves towards Luke, who responds by pulling out his own lightsaber that he'd had hidden in what appeared to be an empty blaster holster, and ignites it and blocks her first attack with his own red blade. As the two fight, it quickly becomes clear to us that neither is going full speed or really trying to kill the other one. Finally, Mara asks, just why have you come here anyway? Luke takes a few steps back, deactivates his saber, and again holds up his hands defensively. I'm looking for a map to an ancient Sith that's locked away in the unknown regions. Mara stares blankly at him, as if no clue what he's talking about, before a momentary look of realization hits her, which she quickly tries to hide. She then says, and you thought you'd be able to access such a map at any old terminal? Luke shakes his head. No, I was mostly just looking for a map of this place. All the corridors tend to look the same to me. Mara now deactivates her saber. And why are you looking for a map to some ancient Sith in the first place? You don't seem like the type to me. The type? Luke asks back, confused. Yeah, the type who'd want to be a Sith, Mara answers. Luke's expression darkens a bit. I am a Sith, he declares. Really, Mara Jade says back, it takes more than a crimson-bladed saber and rudimentary skills with it to make you a Sith. Luke starts to look angry and says, I was holding back. Mara gives a cocky grin and says, so was I. Oh, Luke replies, why is that? I thought you wanted to kill me and my father. Mara gives a genuine smile to that, but before she can say anything, we hear the comm on her wrist beep, and she answers it. A voice then says over it, Mistress, we are receiving a Priority 1 signal from Grand Moff Tarkin. Understood, Mara says back. I'll be there momentarily. And with that, Mara starts to simply walk down the corridor and away from Luke. "Hey," Luke calls out, "you're just going to leave me here?" Mara shrugs and says back over her shoulder, "You're never going to find what you came here looking for. And besides, you're harmless." Luke gives an angry look for a moment, really angry, and like he's about to go charging after her. Instead, he simply picks up his helmet, puts it back on, and starts to wander around again. We then jump scenes, and we find ourselves in deep space with one lone Star Destroyer, and then we're on the bridge of that ship and see Grand Admiral Thrawn standing there, looking out into the vast nothingness of space. A moment later, what appears to be his first officer comes up to him and says quietly, "Never would I consider questioning you, Admiral, but what are we waiting for out here?" Thrawn is silent for a long moment, as if asking himself that very same question, but then he says, "Our Emperor once personally told me that if anything should ever happen to him, I was to come to these coordinates and wait." The first officer then replies, "Respectively, sir, just how long are we supposed to wait? We have received orders from the Imperial Senate to return to Coruscant." Before Thrawn can respond, another officer calls out, "Admiral, a shuttle has just emerged from hyperspace, and it's broadcasting the clearance code of the Emperor himself." Thrawn nods. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Give it permission to land, and then have the entire hangar bay cleared. I shall receive the shuttle alone." A few of the bridge officers exchange looks, but none say a word. We're then in the otherwise empty hangar bay with Thrawn, as the ramp to an Imperial shuttle lowers, and down it walks a red-clad Imperial Sentinel droid, who has a dark blank monitor for a face, which suddenly takes on the image and the voice of Emperor Palpatine himself. It then says, "Grand Admiral, you have been chosen for the highest of honors, to lead and safeguard the remnants of my empire until my triumphant return from death itself. Go now to Jakku, where all shall be made clear to you. The fate of the entire galaxy will rest in your hands, including the fate of your beloved people." Thrawn stands silently for a long moment before contacting the bridge and telling them to set course for Jakku. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and where we might be headed. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.